Alright, everybody. I'm back. Lord loves you, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Discord, all of that. I got bird in my lap. Yeah, we about to watch videos about Yu-Gi-Oh! For the most part. I feel like I might end up watching a video or two about something random. I don't know. But so far, I'm about to watch this video about Bandit Keith on this channel called 414YGO, which obviously would mean Yu-Gi-Oh! 414YGO. So shout out to them. This is about Bandit Keith, and basically it's about the actual outcome of Bandit Keith versus like what 4Kids and all of the stuff that you guys probably, some of you guys probably think, not all of you obviously.
You probably remember Bandit Keith as the
most Yu-Gi-Oh's most horrific ending. Hold on, actually, before I make things all weird, turn that off. There we go.
loud, sunglasses-wearing American cheating his way through duels. But what if I told you the version you grew up with was the censored one? In the original manga, Keith wasn't just a loudmouth. He's a fallen champion manipulated into paranoia, obsession.
I'm gonna talk over him, and I'm actually gonna rewind it. I would be eating slices of bread with peanut butter. So it's my business. Watch the
version you grew up with was the censored one. In the original manga, Keith wasn't just a loudmouth. He's a fallen champion manipulated into paranoia, obsession, and ultimately self-destruction. His ending, not a funny humiliation, but arguably among the series' darkest outcomes. There's even a penalty game so disturbing that it was never put in the anime, and it changes how you look at him completely.
Let's go! Come on!
Yeah, I was trying to tell people.
Stay to the end to see the scene that proves it. So if Keith wasn't just comic relief, then who was he really before Duelist Kingdom even began? Before Keith ever showed up at Duelist Kingdom, he had already lived through the rise and fall of a career. In the manga, he isn't introduced as a cartoonish cheater, but as someone who once stood at the absolute peak of duel monsters in America.
In America!
He had been a national champion with the nickname Bandit Keith, gained from seizing huge prize money in competitions, and his victories were so crushing that many opponents quit playing altogether out of shame and trauma. At one point, he looked untouchable. That illusion ended when he crossed paths with Maximilian Pegasus. What should have been a defining duel became a spectacle that destroyed him. Pegasus only agreed to Keith's challenge after setting impossible terms. $1 million prize, a packed New York duel stadium that could hold 50,000 people, and a nationwide broadcast with profits shared among sponsors and TV stations. For Keith, this was the stage that could cement his name forever, but instead, it became the stage of his downfall. On that day, Pegasus used his Millennium Eye to perform a mind scan, reading downfall, cement his name forever.
Like, I was looking at him and I'm like, why does he look so weird? It's because I have glasses on. I've never seen him without glasses.
But instead, it became the stage of his downfall. On that day, Pegasus used his Millennium Eye to perform a mind scan, reading every card in Keith's hand and the strategies he intended to use. He even wrote the entire breakdown onto a sheet of paper, then handed it to a boy he had just taught the game to. That boy, Tom, defeated Keith in front of a massive crowd without Pegasus ever touching his own deck. Keith seized the paper in disbelief, realizing it had accurately predicted his every move. The humiliation stripped him bare. He wasn't just beaten, he was mocked, and on a national stage. From there, his life unraveled. Instead of moving forward to the next competition, Keith sank into obsession. He convinced himself that the duel had been a robbery, that Pegasus had cheated him, and that the whole system was fixed. In the manga, that paranoia takes on a very real and destructive form. Keith turns to alcohol, drugs, underground gambling, and even games of Russian roulette. His identity is drugs, underground, a very real and destructive form. Keith turns to alcohol, drugs,
He got that thing. Got the. I don't know. I don't condone none of this, but you get the fit. See, I need an America bandana. In America. Alright, let's go.
Underground gambling and even games of Russian roulette. His identity as a champion is gone, replaced by a man chasing numbers and clinging to scrapes of dignity. That collapse also shows up in how he looks and acts. The anime version makes Keith appear loud and confident, almost theatrical. The manga version strips that veneer away. He is drawn gaunt and strung out, his eyes filled with desperation instead of bravado. This isn't a showman anymore. It's someone addicted to the idea of winning, constantly on the edge and afraid of another failure. The cruel part is that Pegasus didn't just beat him once and move on. The humiliation became the defining wound that festered inside Keith. In the manga, the force driving him to Duelist Kingdom is not simple greed or desire for wealth. It is pride and a need to restore stolen honor. Every action he takes is fueled by that obsession, which shifts his role from being a boastful villain to a tragic figure caught in his own paranoia. When he sneaks into Duelist Kingdom, he doesn't come as a cocky challenger, but as someone already consumed by revenge. His so-called crew believes he'll lead them to victory, but he betrays them the moment it serves his purpose, revealing that he is already lost to obsession. What might look like a comic exaggeration in the anime is narrowed to something harsher in the manga. A man caught in a downward spiral of desperation. And the clearest signs of that spiral would soon appear in the way he dueled, where even his tricks and strategies became more proof of how far he had fallen.
So wait.
Cheating was the core of Keith's downfall.
So wait, does...
And nowhere is that clearer.
Did Pegasus actually cheat, or like... did he like not cheat? I don't really remember. Like, I know he probably used the Millennium Eye and all that, but like, is that really cheating, or like, I don't really know.
Than in how he fought his way through Duelist Kingdom. What looked like swagger in the anime reads more like desperation in the manga. His most infamous trick using his wristband wasn't clever showmanship. The manga makes it plain. Keith concealed copies of his 7 completed card inside the band, pulling them out mid-duel and playing them as though he'd actually drawn them. It isn't the image of a master strategist, it's the image of someone too insecure to trust his own deck. The cheating didn't stop there. Keith relied on people around him only to discard them when they no longer had value. His gang was supposed to be his support system, but to him they were nothing more than extra lives to burn. When Bones lost to Joey, Keith lashed out and beat him. Bones pleaded that he had only played the cards Keith told him to, but Keith insisted that he should have won in that case. He spat on Bones and called him useless without his star chips. He then turned to the others, to Kaido and Satake, and demanded that they give him each of their 5 star chips along with one of their duel gloves. After taking them, he beat up the 2 and made his way to the castle. The betrayal wasn't subtle. He humiliated them, took everything useful and left them behind. In the manga, that moment makes it clear. Keith doesn't care about allies. They're pawns, no different from the extra cards hidden in his wristband. Now, his willingness to cheat extended beyond the dueling arena too. At the castle, entry to the semi-finals required special cards called the Honor of the King's Right and the Honor of the King's Left. Because Keith hadn't been invited, he didn't have either. So he broke into Joey's room at night and stole his card. It was an act that exposed just how far he'd fallen, sneaking around like a thief just to keep up the illusion of being a contender. He even risked being caught by Joey's sleep talking and Yugi checking in. And when confronted, again he resorted to violence. Keith proceeded to punch Yugi until he kept quiet. However, Joey came out of his room and fought Keith off. Keith then returned to his room knowing that Joey didn't have another honor card, meaning that he would be disqualified. The effect of all of this weighs heavily when you read it on the page. In animation, the camera breezes through his antics and he looks like a harmless villain with silly tricks. In the manga, well, you're forced to sit with it. Each of his actions underlines the same truth. This is not cleverness, this is collapse. His dueling doesn't feel like competition anymore. It feels like watching an addict trying one last scam, each gamble emptier than the last. And when his final duel against Joey ended, well, Pegasus stepped forward to call Keith out in front of everyone. Not only was the cheating obvious, but Pegasus addressed him as the lowest kind of criminal, shattering what little pride Keith had left. The tricks that were supposed to restore his reputation instead destroyed it even faster than before. And that crushing humiliation set the stage for what came next.
Hey,
because
really
the punishment waiting for Keith wasn't just another comic dismissal. It was darker, more brutal, and unlike anything the anime ever showed. After Joey defeated Keith, the anime showed a trapdoor gag where he was dropped away almost kinda like a comical joke.
Looks like Team Rocket's blasting off again!
But the manga closes his story very differently. Instead of a comic fall and later reappearances under Marik's control, the original version ends with a confrontation that seals his fate permanently. Keith, furious after losing despite cheating, stalked down the halls of Pegasus's castle. Every shred of pride he had left now turned into rage, and with a knife in his hand, he cornered Pegasus, demanding the prize. He believed he'd been robbed again, just as he had in New York, and now his fury boiled over at the man he blamed for destroying his life. Now, Pegasus's reaction wasn't anger. He blamed for destroying his life. Now, Pegasus's reaction wasn't anger. There was no argument or no offer of another duel. Calmly, he dismissed Keith as a fallen champion who had already lost his duelist spirit long ago. But then he declared punishment. Instead of cards, Keith would face a penalty game. And this is where the manga leaves no room for humor. Pegasus inflicted the hand and gun penalty game on Keith, warping his own hand into a gun. The rules of this game allowed for no escape. Keith was forced into a deadly round of Russian roulette against himself, each pull of the trigger echoing his reckless dependence on luck and gambling. Watching this scene unfold, Keith doesn't look like the brash villain we remember from the anime. The panels focus on his fear. Sweat rolls down his face, his eyes lock wide, his teeth grit as the reality sets in. Every second drags out his terror, the once cocky champion reduced to panic by the very gamble he can't escape. There is no chance to bargain, no chance to rebound. The penalty game itself forces his hand, and ultimately, it takes his life. It's a grim resolution that reflects the darker vision of the manga. Where the anime brushed him off with humiliation and later recycled him for more appearances, the manga chose finality. Bandit Keith did not return. His obsession, his addiction to gambling and cheating, and his broken pride all ended in one last forced gamble that killed him. The hand and gun scenario works as the cruel conclusion to his arc. A career built on risk and shortcuts collapses into the ultimate punishment, having to wager his life on chance until nothing is left. His story becomes less about a villain getting what he deserves and more about a tragic warning of what obsession and paranoia can destroy. Bandit Keith's story is just one example of how the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga was far darker than most people remember. But what if I told you the entire Duelist Kingdom arc wasn't just a tournament? It was written like a psychological thriller. Now, if you want to see just how twisted that first arc really was, well, click here to watch my dive on Duelist Kingdom.
That thumbnail is crazy. But that video was cool, and I got another one right here for y'all.
You the Yu-Gi-Oh!
The shocking truth about Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist Kingdom. Also by 414.
Grew up with isn't the real story. The Duelist Kingdom arc may seem like a high-stakes game of cards, but in its original form, it's filled with darkness, violence, and shocking twists that never made it to your TV screens. We all loved Duelist Kingdom for its legendary duels and iconic showdowns, but did you know this fun arc was originally one of sacrifice, violence, and even death in the manga? Why was it toned down so drastically, and just how far did censorship go to hide the true nature of Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, let's dive in and find out how dark this legendary arc really was. For these huge
sorry, I don't know
differences
what's
goes
going on.
all the way
Copyright.
back to the source material. The original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga by Kazuki Takahashi was never meant to be a light-hearted card game story. It was dark, intense, and focused on heavy themes like revenge, psychological torment, and the real dangers of the shadow games. In the manga, losing wasn't just about dropping life points. It could mean losing your sanity, your dignity, or even your life. The early Japanese anime from Studio Gallop stuck close to this mature tone, making it clear that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was aimed at teens and older fans. But when 4Kids Entertainment took over for the Western release, everything changed. Their goal was to make Yu-Gi-Oh! Safe and marketable for a much younger audience. That meant cutting out violence, erasing mature themes, and reworking storylines to fit strict broadcast standards. The anime shifted from a narrative about dangerous games and dark consequences to a show that promoted the card game and kept things as kid-friendly as possible.
You know, I didn't.
Scenes were sanity that promoted the card game and kept things.
You know, I didn't realize that was a smiley face until like this year, and I've seen it dozens of times.
As kid-friendly as possible. Scenes were sanitized, dialogue was rewritten, and even character designs were altered to remove anything that could be considered inappropriate. This transformation didn't just lighten the mood, it changed the entire feeling of the story. And some of the most unsettling details from the manga were replaced or toned down, especially when it came to the fates of key characters. One of the best examples of how much darker the original story could get is what happened to Yugi's grandfather at the start of Duelist Kingdom. In the manga, Pegasus doesn't just trap Grandpa's soul in a card, he uses the Millennium Eye to seal it inside a regular VHS tape. This detail isn't just odd, it's unsettling. Yugi is forced to carry around this tape, knowing his grandfather's soul is literally inside it. Even more, Yugi can actually put this tape into a video camera and see and talk to his grandfather throughout the tournament. This constant reminder of what's at stake gives the whole arc a tense, desperate feeling. The anime adaptation, of course, changed this, making Grandpa's imprisonment less disturbing by tying it to a Duel Monsters card and leaving out the VHS tape entirely. This softened the tone and kept everything centered around the card game. But in the manga, that VHS tape symbolized how far Pegasus would go to manipulate and torment his victims. This wasn't the only time the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga pushed boundaries with its consequences. And here's a moment that might shock you. Did you know that Yugi put Kaiba in a coma in the original manga? Their duel in episode 1 of the anime is based on various chapters from the manga. It combines Yugi's first two encounters with Kaiba, but excludes many events, including the Death Tea theme park. Now, after their infamous duel, Yugi activated what's called a penalty game. Instead of simply walking away after winning, the Pharaoh, the darker presence within the Millennium Puzzle, punished Kaiba so severely that it left him unconscious for 6 entire months. That's right, 6 months of Kaiba being completely comatose, which actually sparks a lot of the events of Duelist Kingdom moving forward. This act wasn't about teaching Kaiba a lesson gently, it was about making an example of him. This moment captured a different side of the Pharaoh. Far from the guiding protector, this moment teaching Kaiba events of Duelist Kingdom moving forward. This act wasn't about teaching Kaiba a lesson gently, it was about making an example of him.
That makes the whole thing different, bro. Like that, just that detail right here. Look at him. Look at him. Obviously, he hates Yugi, but like now we see. Look, he put him in a coma, bro. That's
about
insane,
teaching
bro.
Kaiba a lesson gently, it was about making an example of him. This moment captured a different side of the Pharaoh. Far from the guiding protector we see later, this version of him was cold, calculating, and unforgiving. In his eyes, Kaiba's actions didn't just warrant defeat, but outright repentance on a psychological level. The manga framed this as divine justice, a harsh but supposedly fair punishment for Kaiba's arrogance and cruelty. However, it also highlighted just how terrifyingly absolute the Pharaoh could be in his decisions. Now, in the anime, this was replaced by a duel-ending lesson in humility, and the coma twist was completely removed to soften the fallout. It made Yugi's victory feel cleaner, but also far less impactful.
Enter the trading arena and go from the bullpen to the bull market. Turn data into sharper decisions.
Mai Valentine, or Mai Kujaku in the original, stands out as a character whose appearance was dramatically altered between the manga and the anime. In the manga, her outfit during Duelist Kingdom was intentionally provocative. A corset-styled top held together by strings that exposed the middle of her chest, paired with a short skirt. This design wasn't just for show, it matched Mai's confident personality and the way she used her looks as a tactic in duels, often distracting her opponents and asserting control over the situation. A clear example of this comes up in her duel with Rex Raptor on the boat to Duelist Kingdom. In the anime, Mai offers Rex a kiss if he wins, but in the manga, she ups the stakes, telling Rex she'll do anything he wants all night long. This bold approach was toned down significantly in the anime adaptation, as well as her outfit that was redesigned for more coverage. Her cleavage was reduced or erased, and her skirt was lengthened. Now, these changes were made to make the show more acceptable for younger audiences in the West, following 4Kids' standards for broadcast. This wasn't an isolated case. The same approach was taken with other female characters and even extended to the artwork on Duel Monsters cards themselves. When it comes to the actual Duel Monsters cards, censorship took center stage with some of the most recognizable monsters. Harpy Lady is a prime example. In the original Japanese version, her artwork featured a revealing outfit and sharp, intimidating details that gave her a striking presence. For the Western release, 4Kids made significant changes. They added a full bodysuit to cover her exposed skin and removed the prominent nipple spikes from her costume, when equipped with a card cyber shield. These edits were all about reducing her sexualization and making the card more suitable for a younger audience. The result was a much tamer look that changed the overall tone of the card. What was once an edgy, mature design became something more playful and less threatening. These types of visual changes weren't just about appearances, they shaped how fans experienced the world of Duel Monsters, making it feel less intense than what Japanese audiences originally saw. But not every unsettling element in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was erased with a digital paintbrush. Some of the creepiest moments were left to the story itself, especially in duels that pushed the boundaries of what you'd expect from a kid's show. Another moment that stands out in the manga is the duel between Yami Yugi and the Ventriloquist of the Dead, also known as the Puppeteer of Doom. This character isn't just a Kaiba impersonator. He uses a Kaiba puppet and the real Kaiba's stolen deck to taunt and intimidate Yugi. The Ventriloquist's doll speaks with a stuttering, unsettling tone, claiming to be Kaiba's soul seeking revenge. The duel quickly became a game of psychological horror, with Yugi visibly shaken by the bizarre performance and the idea that some part of Kaiba's grudge might be haunting him. Seeing the Blue Eyes White Dragon played by the puppet only adds to the tension. The Ventriloquist uses Kaiba's cards and cruel strategies to throw Yugi off balance, trying to win not just with cards, but with mind games. However, Yugi manages to turn things around, eventually winning the duel. Now, in the manga, Yugi then inflicts a penalty game. The Ventriloquist is forced to hallucinate that the Kaiba doll transforms into his own image, becoming the puppet master and he the puppet under control. A punishment that's both eerie and fitting. Now, the anime changed this duel, removing the ventriloquist entirely and stripping away most of the psychological edge. But the manga kept pushing boundaries, especially with the next eliminator Yugi faces. Yugi's showdown with Panic, or the player killer of darkness, is one of the most intense duels in the original manga. Panic wasn't just another eliminator, he was designed to be a real threat. In the manga, his appearance is bulkier, his attitude is cold, and his tactics are all about intimidation. There was also a scene in the original anime that was removed from the dub where Mai is being dragged away into the darkness by Panic, which gave him a much more menacing and darker feel. However, the most striking difference comes from the weapon that Panic uses, a rope noose integrated directly into his gauntlet. This wasn't just for show. The noose went around Yugi's neck. If Yugi lost, the noose would tighten, posing a direct physical threat to his life. The stakes in this duel went way beyond cards or life points, making the atmosphere much more tense than anything in the anime. The anime adaptation of course removed the gauntlet and noose, replacing them with vague threats tied to the Shadow Realm and fire. Lots of fire. This change completely erased the immediate danger Panic posed. In the manga, when Yugi wins, he punishes Panic with a penalty game that forces him to hallucinate being hanged, an experience that's graphic and disturbing. The anime swapped this out for a generic Shadow Realm banishment, stripping away the harsher consequences. These kinds of changes didn't just affect the violence or danger in Yu-Gi-Oh!, they also shaped how mature or suggestive moments were handled, especially in scenes involving other main characters. In the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime and manga, Anzu, or Taya in the dub, found herself in situations that were far more suggestive than anything we saw in the 4Kids dub. One memorable example was a scene where Anzu is taking a shower. There was no real purpose for the moment beyond fan service, with the focus being entirely on her vulnerability. It's a fleeting part of the story, but it signals the manga's willingness to push boundaries that didn't align with the anime's sanitized tone. The other questionable moment from this part involves Joey and Tristan. In one scene, they try to spy on Anzu while she's changing. This classic pervy act isn't just played for humor. It underlines how the manga leaned into awkward, more adult encounters. However, 4Kids Entertainment stepped in to make sure this behavior didn't appear in the anime, which was marketed as a family-friendly show. So this part was completely removed. In the dub version of episode 22, Teo was attacked by a mugger. However, in the Japanese version, she was filmed by a pervert videotaping Tea's skirt. The scenes involving this guy using his video camera as well as the camera's first-person view were cut from the dub version of the anime completely. Now, another great scene that was cut from the dub came in episode 28. While Teo, Tristan, and Bakura are investigating Pegasus's castle late at night, they are about to climb one of the towers. Teo complains about having to climb up the rope first because Tristan and Bakura would be able to see up her skirt. In response, the two boys wear blindfolds while climbing. By cutting these moments, the anime abandoned much of the manga's edginess. Anzu's character in particular shifted away from being a focal point for these risque situations. Instead, she became a more straightforward and platonic supporting figure. One of the clearest examples of censorship in Duelist Kingdom is how the anime handled guns. In the Japanese version of the anime, Bandit Keith, after losing to Joey, confronted Pegasus with a gun, showing just how desperate and ruthless he'd become. The weapon was central to the moment and made the threat feel real. But in the dub, this was completely changed. Keith just points his finger at Pegasus, mimicking a gun, which takes away all the intensity and danger from the scene. The same thing happens with Pegasus's goons. In the Japanese version, they pull guns on Kaiba, but in the anime, they just pointed their fingers instead, making the threat almost comical. These changes were more than just edits. They shifted the tone of the entire series. By removing firearms and replacing them with finger gestures, the anime lost the sense of real danger that the manga built up. The stakes felt lower, and the characters' actions didn't carry the same weight. Of course, not every dangerous moment was erased. Some of the most intense scenes in the manga still made it through, even if they were toned down or changed for the anime. Kaiba's boldest and most badass moments in the manga aren't just about his dueling skills. They're about his ability to take dangerous situations into his own hands. One of the most intense examples of this happens when he is confronted by a former Kaiba Corp employee. The man pulls a gun on Kaiba, and what does Kaiba do? He blocks the attack by throwing a Duel Monsters card at the gun, jamming the weapon, then taking it for himself. It's a shocking display of nerve and precision, showing that Kaiba doesn't just rely on strategy in games. He's ready to physically defend himself if it comes to that too.
Yeah, Kaiba's the man.
Cole, he's my miracle child. So how does your miracle child get cancer?
Additionally, this scene also added to the brilliance that is Seto Kaiba and how far he plans things in advance. Do you know what card he used to jam the gun? Well, it was Gyokuten no Megami. What makes him use this card specifically brilliant is the fact that the card's name when translated is Goddess of Reversal. Kaiba used this card to reverse his situation.
That's hilarious.
Amazing. Now, the manga takes this whole scene to another level in what I like to call the helicopter incident. So, after jamming the gun with the card, Kaiba doesn't stop there. Once he has the upper hand, he breaks the man's finger, delivering a brutal message, showing us readers that Kaiba doesn't tolerate anyone standing in his way. Now, after discovering that the people flying him to Duelist Kingdom are loyal to Pegasus and reversing the situation in his favor, Kaiba wastes no time making his move. Despite being thousands of feet in the air, he forces them out mid-flight, risking his life just to ensure he can take control of the aircraft. And his dialogue throughout all of this is a testament to how brutal Kaiba is in the manga. For me, these moments define Kaiba's ruthlessness and relentless drive, but the anime toned them down significantly, stripping away much of his menace. Now, Kaiba's brutality didn't stop at the helicopter scene. When Kaiba arrived at Pegasus's castle in the manga, his impatience and sheer determination were on full display. He wasn't there to negotiate or wait for formalities. When Croquet, Pegasus's right-hand man, tried to stall him, offering to set up a meeting the following day, Kaiba didn't hesitate to make his move. Grabbing Croquet by the collar, Kaiba immediately established that he wasn't going to sit idly by while Pegasus toyed with him, but it didn't stop at intimidation. Kaiba pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at Croquet's head. A shocking display of just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. This wasn't a bluff either. Kaiba even referenced Soru Watari, a former Kaiba Corp guard, reminding him of his training and showing Kaiba's familiarity with weapons was no accident. It wasn't just about power, it was about ruthlessness and strategy. Following this, Kaiba took Croquet hostage in a guest room, threatening to snap his neck in a briefcase if Pegasus did not speak to him immediately. Shortly afterwards, Pegasus appeared on the screen and permitted Kaiba to see him if he could beat Yugi in a duel. These moments cemented the dark side of Kaiba's character, showing not only his desperation but his cold, calculated willingness to use violence as a tool. The anime completely removed this scene, softening Kaiba's personality and stripping away this gritty anti-hero edge. Without it, the complexity of his character felt diminished. One of the most surreal and early symbolic moments in the later Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist Kingdom arc comes during Yugi's dream sequence, which was heavily censored in the dub to avoid controversy. In the original version, Yugi dreams that his grandfather's soul, trapped in a card by Pegasus, calls out to him. He runs through an ominous courtyard only to find 3 massive stone crosses, each bearing the cards imprisoning the souls of his grandfather, Mokuba, and Kaiba. The imagery was clear. These crosses symbolize suffering and sacrifice, and their religious undertones added an unsettling depth to the scene. The eerie atmosphere was heightened by a final shot of a church in the background, reinforcing the weight of this spiritual struggle. Unsurprisingly, the dub anime heavily altered this sequence. The crosses were replaced with generic stone pillars, eliminating the crucifixion imagery. Even so, inconsistencies remained. One shot still reveals an arm extending from one of the crosses, a haunting detail the censors missed. To further sanitize the scene, the church in the background was also removed entirely, softening the dream's impact. This censorship robbed the sequence of its dramatic intensity. It dulled the symbolism of characters' internal struggles, ultimately transforming a deeply thematic moment into something far less thought-provoking. Now, in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, the tone wasn't just darker, it was sharper and much more direct, especially in how characters spoke to each other. Swearing and harsh language weren't uncommon, reflecting the teenage audience the manga was aimed at. Characters like Kaiba, Bakura, and even Yugi himself weren't afraid to drop cutting insults or display raw frustration. This edge gave their dialogue a more realistic and emotional weight, adding to the intensity of their conflicts. It wasn't unwarranted, but deliberate, used to emphasize the stakes and underline the characters' personalities. is. For example, Bandit Keith was far more aggressive in the manga. When dismissing his opponents, he would throw in comments laced with profanity or arrogance, painting him as someone who stops at nothing to assert dominance. The dub anime, of course, completely scrubbed his swearing and dialed back his sharpness. Keith still had an ego, but the contempt in his language was watered down, making him less intimidating in comparison. Without this harsher dialogue, the dynamics between characters in the anime became much softer. Interactions that carried raw emotion or intense hostility in the manga felt cleaner or even sanitized in the dubbed anime. And while this softened tone helped the series fit into Western children's programming, it sacrificed the emotional depth that made the manga relationships stand out. That rough, unfiltered edge was integral to the tone, and its absence created a noticeable gap in how dramatic moments unfolded. Sticking with Bandit Keith, his story in the manga is on a whole other level of dark. His backstory paints him as a former United States Duel Monsters champion, someone who rose to the top only to come crashing down after being humiliated by Pegasus. But what makes it grittier is how the manga digs into his downfall. Keith turns to gambling, substances like alcohol and drugs, deeper.
You can unlock more than ever with the American Express Platinum Card. Access over $3,500 in value.
More tragic layer to his character. Pegasus wasn't just chasing power, he was trying to use Kaiba Corp's groundbreaking holographic technology to recreate his late wife Cecilia. This wasn't some small side goal, it was the driving force behind everything that he did. Winning the Duelist Kingdom tournament wasn't about the thrill of victory. It was a calculated move to seize control of Kaiba Corp and further his plans. This mix of grief and hunger for power made Pegasus an unsettling figure. He didn't hesitate to manipulate and exploit others to achieve his goals. A great example is how he used a child to humiliate Bandit Keith for trapping Yugi's grandfather's soul in a VHS tape. The manga consistently reinforced his ruthlessness, showing Pegasus as a character willing to cross any line. But when the anime was localized, this side of him was heavily softened. His story became less about tragedy and more about an eccentric villain, dramatically reducing the emotional and sinister weight he brought to the Duelist Kingdom arc. Now, in the manga, Pegasus's fate is sealed in a way that completely shifts the tone of the story. After Yugi defeats him and the Duelist Kingdom tournament ends, Yami Bakura appears. And this isn't one of those dramatic interruptions with vague threats. Bakura murders Pegasus outright, tearing the Millennium Eye directly from his eye socket and even licks the blood off the artifact. This act isn't played up with flashy effects or softened visuals. It's brutal, and it makes the consequences of the Millennium items feel terrifyingly real. Pegasus, who had until then been this all-powerful villain, is reduced to a lifeless body in an instant. In the anime, things play out very differently, of course. Pegasus survives his defeat and is shown recovering, with no sign of the violent end he meets in the manga. He even goes on to appear in later arcs and makes it into the movies. This lets his character develop further, but takes away the sense of real consequence that the manga delivers. The decision to keep Pegasus alive in the anime, well, it softened the impact of the story's ending and removed the sense of danger that came with the Millennium items. This difference highlights just how far apart the manga and anime are in terms of tone and stakes. Looking back, it's wild to see just how much changed between the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga and what most of us watched on TV as kids. The manga had moments like Kaiba being left in a coma after a penalty game and Pegasus's brutal death at the hands of Yami Bakura. Scenes that 4Kids dub either changed or cut entirely. These differences didn't just change the tone, they completely reshaped the story and its impact. Which of these shocking manga moments stood out to you the most?
I think Kaiba being in a coma was the crazy thing. I mean, I knew the other stuff, but I didn't know that Kaiba was in a coma. That was pretty crazy. Let me know what your favorite thing was if this ends up on YouTube, which it might not. So it might be Twitch exclusive. But I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Have a good one. You already know what I say. Yatate. Have a good day. Lord loves you. Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Discord, all of that. And we out.